The boxcar door slammed open with a violence that matched the chaos in Willa Dawson's chest, and she stumbled backward against rusted metal as the freight train screeched into Buffalo, Wyoming, carrying nothing but her shattered heart and the clothes on her back. The November wind of 1883 cut through her threadbare coat like 1,000 tiny knives, and she wrapped her arms around herself, watching the sun sink behind the Bighorn Mountains with the kind of finality that made her wonder if anything good would ever rise again. She had left everything behind in Cheyenne, her husband's grave, the debts that swallowed their small house whole, the pitying looks from neighbors who whispered about how Edgar Dawson had gambled away every cent before the fever took him, leaving his 23-year-old widow with less than nothing. The train lurched to a grinding halt, and Willa jumped down onto the gravel beside the tracks, her worn boots hitting the ground with a thud that echoed the hollowness inside her. She had no plan, no destination, no family waiting with open arms. All she knew was that staying in Cheyenne meant watching the bank auction off every piece of her former life, meant facing Edgar's creditors who looked at her like she was something they could collect on too. So she had climbed into that freight car in the dead of night, hidden among crates and barrels, and let the rails carry her north toward whatever mercy the universe might spare. Buffalo stretched before her in the gathering dusk, a rough collection of wooden buildings and muddy streets that looked like it had been carved out of the wilderness through sheer stubbornness. Smoke rose from chimneys, and she could hear the distant sound of a piano playing in what was probably a saloon. Her stomach clenched with hunger she had not eaten since yesterday morning, when a kind woman in a general store had given her a biscuit out of charity. Willa started walking toward the main street, her legs unsteady after hours in the rattling boxcar, trying to figure out where someone with no money and no prospects might find shelter before the temperature dropped any further. She made it maybe 50 yards before her vision started to blur at the edges, the combination of hunger and exhaustion finally catching up with her. Willa stumbled, caught herself against a wooden post, and was trying to gather the strength to keep moving when she heard bootfalls approaching. She looked up and saw a man leading a horse, his silhouette backlit by the last rays of sunlight so she could not make out his features clearly, only the broad shoulders and the hat that marked him as a rancher or cowboy. "Madam." His voice was deep and carried a note of genuine concern that made her throat tighten. "You all right there?" Willa tried to straighten up, tried to summon some dignity from wherever it had hidden itself. "I am fine, thank you." But her body betrayed her, swaying again, and suddenly he was there, his hand steady on her elbow, keeping her upright. This close, she could see his face strong-jawed, weathered from sun and wind, with dark eyes that studied her with an intensity that was more worried than intrusive. He looked to be in his late 20s, with the kind of solid presence that suggested a man who knew his place in the world. "You do not look fine," he said bluntly. "When did you last eat?" Willa opened her mouth to lie, to insist she was perfectly capable, but something about the genuine concern in his expression made the words die on her lips. "Yesterday," she admitted quietly. He nodded like this confirmed something he had already suspected. "Come on. There is a restaurant just down the street. Let me buy you supper." Every ounce of pride Willa had left wanted to refuse, wanted to tell this stranger she did not need his charity. But her empty stomach and the cold seeping into her bones won out over pride. "I cannot pay you back," she said, needing him to understand that she was not looking for handouts, that this was not who she normally was. "Did I ask you to?" He was already guiding her gently down the street, his horse following behind them with patient steps. "My name is Marcus Vaughn. I have a ranch about 5 miles outside town, and you are Willa Dawson." She let him lead her toward the warm glow of lamplight spilling from a building with a sign that read Miller's Restaurant. "I came in on the freight train." She saw understanding flicker across his face. He knew what that meant. Knew she was running from something or towards something or maybe just away. But he did not press her with questions. Just opened the door and ushered her into the blessedly warm interior where the smell of cooking food made her head spin with longing. The restaurant was simple but clean, with a handful of tables and a counter where a middle-aged woman with kind eyes looked up from wiping down surfaces. Marcus guided Willa to a table near the stove and pulled out a chair for her. She sank into it gratefully, her legs trembling with relief. "Evening, Marcus," the woman called out. "What can I get you?" "2 plates of whatever you have hot, Mrs. Miller," Marcus said, settling into the chair across from Willa and removing his hat. His hair was dark brown, slightly too long, and she noticed he had a small scar above his left eyebrow. "And coffee, please." Mrs. Miller's gaze moved to Willa, taking in her pale face and worn clothing, but there was no judgment there, just the practical assessment of someone who had seen hard times before. "Coming right up." Willa folded her hands in her lap, suddenly aware of how she must look travel-stained, exhausted, desperate. "Thank you," she said quietly, meeting Marcus's eyes. "You did not have to do this." "No, I did not have to," he agreed. "But my mother raised me to help folks who need it, and you looked like you were about to fall over." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with that same direct gaze. "What brought you to Buffalo, Willa Dawson?" She hesitated, wondering how much to tell this stranger who had shown her more kindness in 5 minutes than she had experienced in months. "I am starting over," she said finally. "There is nothing left for me where I came from." Something in Marcus's expression softened. "That takes courage." "Or desperation," Willa said with a bitter laugh. "I am not sure which one I am running on anymore." Mrs. Miller appeared with 2 steaming plates of beef stew and thick slices of bread, along with 2 cups of coffee that sent fragrant steam curling into the air. Willa stared at the food like it might disappear if she blinked, and then forced herself to pick up her spoon with a semblance of dignity. But the first bite hit her empty stomach like salvation, and she had to stop herself from devouring everything in front of her like an animal. Marcus ate quietly, not watching her in a way that would have made her self-conscious, but she could feel his presence across the table, steady and undemanding. When she had taken the edge off her hunger, she looked up to find him wrapping his hands around his coffee cup, his expression thoughtful. "Buffalo is not a bad place to start over," he said. "Small enough that folks help each other out, big enough that you can find work if you are willing." He paused, then continued carefully. "There is always work at ranches this time of year, cooking, mending, that sort of thing. My place could use someone." Willa set down her spoon, her heart suddenly beating faster. "You are offering me a job, if you want it." Marcus met her eyes steadily. "Room and board in the main house plus wages. It would be honest work, and I would not expect anything from you except that you do the job." The emphasis on that last part was subtle but clear. He was telling her this was not some veiled proposition, that he was not looking to take advantage of her situation. She studied his face, trying to understand why this man would make such an offer to a complete stranger he found half collapsed by the railroad tracks. "Why?" she asked bluntly. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "My wife died 2 years ago," he said finally, his voice even but carrying an undercurrent of old pain. "Childbirth. Lost the baby too. Since then, it has just been me and my ranch hand, Tom, and neither of us can cook worth a damn or keep a house from falling into complete disorder." He looked at her with those steady dark eyes. "I know what it is like to need to start over, to wake up one day and realize everything you thought your life would be is just gone. So when I see someone else in that place, seems only right to offer a hand up. Willa felt something crack open in her chest, some tight knot of fear and loneliness loosening just slightly. This man understood. He had stood where she was standing, in that horrible space where the future was a blank slate because the past had been torn away. "I was married too," she heard herself say. "Edgar died 6 months ago, left me with nothing but debts and a reputation as the widow who could not hold onto her husband's legacy. Then we are both people our old lives do not fit anymore," Marcus said simply. "So what do you say, Willa Dawson? Want to start over with me tonight?" The words hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility and hope, and the fragile chance that maybe, just maybe, climbing onto that freight train had been the right choice after all. Willa looked at this stranger with his honest face and his offer of work and shelter, and made a decision that felt like the first real choice she had made in months. "Yes," she said, "I want to start over." Marcus's face broke into a smile that transformed his whole appearance, warming those dark eyes and making him look younger, less burdened. "Good. Finish your supper, and then we will head out to the ranch. I have an extra room you can use, and tomorrow we will figure out all the details." They finished their meal in companionable silence, and when Marcus paid Mrs. Miller and thanked her for the food, Willa followed him back out into the cold November night. He helped her up onto his horse, then swung up behind her, his arm steady around her waist to keep her secure as they rode out of Buffalo toward his ranch. The stars were brilliant overhead, undimmed by city lights, and Willa felt the solid warmth of Marcus at her back, the gentle sway of the horse beneath them, and let herself believe that maybe the worst was behind her now. The ranch house materialized out of the darkness after about half an hour of riding, a sturdy 2-story building with a barn and several outbuildings nearby. Marcus helped her down from the horse and led her inside, lighting lamps as they went. The interior was neat but clearly lacking a woman's touch. Functional furniture, bare walls, everything clean but impersonal. "Your room is upstairs, second door on the right," Marcus said, handing her one of the lamps. "There should be quilts in the chest at the foot of the bed if you get cold. Tom lives in the bunkhouse, so you will have privacy. Breakfast is usually around dawn, but tomorrow just come down whenever you wake up." Willa took the lamp, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of what had just happened. This morning she had been in a boxcar with no idea where she would end up, and now she was standing in a ranch house with a job and a room of her own and a man who had asked nothing of her except that she let him help. "Marcus," she said, her voice catching slightly, "thank you for all of this." He met her eyes and she saw understanding there and something else she could not quite name. "We all need help sometimes," he said quietly. "No shame in accepting it when it is offered. Get some rest, Willa. Tomorrow is a new day." She climbed the stairs to her room and found it simple but comfortable: a bed with a thick mattress, a washstand, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over dark fields. Willa set the lamp down and sank onto the bed, her whole body suddenly trembling with the release of tension she had been holding for so long. She was safe. She had food in her belly and a roof over her head and a job that would let her earn her own way. And it was all because a cowboy named Marcus Vaughn had found her by the railroad tracks and offered her a chance to start over. Willa wrapped herself in the quilts and let herself cry for the first time since leaving Cheyenne. Not tears of despair this time, but something closer to relief, to gratitude, to the fragile beginning of hope. She woke to pale morning light streaming through the window and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. For a moment, Willa could not remember where she was, her heart racing with disorientation, and then the events of the previous night came flooding back. The freight train, Marcus finding her. The job offer. She sat up slowly, every muscle in her body aching from days of tension and uncomfortable travel, and made herself presentable as best she could with the water in the basin and her limited supplies. Downstairs, she found Marcus at the kitchen table with another man who looked to be in his 50s, weathered and lean with gray threading through his dark hair. They both looked up when she entered, and Marcus rose to his feet automatically. "Morning," he said. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," Willa admitted. "Thank you. This is Tom Garrett, my ranch hand," Marcus said, gesturing to the other man. "Tom, this is Willa Dawson. She is going to be helping out around the house." Tom nodded to her, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "Welcome, madam. Always good to have decent cooking around here again." "No pressure or anything," Marcus said dryly, but there was humor in his voice. He poured her a cup of coffee and gestured to the stove where a pan of somewhat burned bacon sat alongside eggs that looked edible but not appetizing. "This is what we have been living on, so trust me, you cannot do worse." Willa accepted the coffee gratefully and surveyed the kitchen with a practiced eye. It was well equipped but disorganized, with supplies shoved randomly into cabinets and no real system to anything. "I can work with this," she said. "If you give me today to get things sorted out, I will have proper meals starting tomorrow." "Take whatever time you need," Marcus said. "Tom and I will be working with the horses today, so the house is yours. If you need anything from town, make a list, and I will pick it up later this week." They finished their makeshift breakfast and the men headed out, leaving Willa alone in the quiet house. She stood in the kitchen for a long moment, letting the silence settle around her, and then rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She went through every cabinet and drawer, reorganizing supplies, taking inventory of what was available. She found a broom and swept the floors, beat the dust from the rugs, opened windows to let in fresh air despite the cold. It felt good to work with her hands, to have a purpose again, to transform this functional but lifeless space into something that felt more like a home. By the time Marcus and Tom came back in for lunch, Willa had managed to put together a decent soup from supplies she found in the pantry, along with fresh bread she had started that morning. The smell filled the house, and she saw Marcus stop in the doorway, something crossing his face that looked like memory and loss and maybe a little bit of comfort. "Smells good," he said quietly. They ate at the kitchen table, and Willa found herself watching Marcus when she thought he was not paying attention. He had a quiet competence about him, a way of moving through the world that suggested a man who knew his own mind and did not feel the need to prove anything to anyone. When he caught her looking, she glanced away quickly, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Willa woke early and cooked breakfast for the men before they headed out to work the ranch. She spent her days cleaning, mending, organizing, slowly bringing order and warmth to the house that had been without a woman's touch for 2 years. In the evenings, she cooked dinner and they all ate together, the conversation gradually becoming easier, more natural. Tom had a dry wit that surprised her, and Marcus had a way of listening that made her feel heard, valued. 2 weeks after her arrival, Marcus found her in the kitchen after dinner while Tom had gone back to the bunkhouse. She was washing dishes, her hands in soapy water, when he came to stand beside her with a towel to dry. "You do not have to do that," Willa said. "I can manage." "I know," Marcus said, taking a clean plate from her, "but it goes faster with 2. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes before Marcus spoke again. "You have done good work here, Willa. The house feels different, warmer somehow." "It was easy," she said, scrubbing at a stubborn pot. "You had all the right supplies, just needed someone to organize them." "It is more than that." Marcus set down the towel and turned to face her. You have brought life back to this place. I did not realize how much I was just existing until you showed up and reminded me what it felt like to actually live in a home instead of just sleeping in a house." Willa's hands stilled in the water, her heart suddenly beating faster. She turned to look at Marcus and found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. The air between them felt charged with something she could not quite name, something that had been building over these past 2 weeks of shared meals and quiet conversations and moments when their eyes met across the room. "Marcus," she started, not sure what she was going to say. "I know it has not been that long," he said, his voice low and earnest. "And I know you came here running from a life that hurt you, looking for a fresh start. But Willa, having you here, it has reminded me that my heart did not die with Sarah. That I am still capable of feeling things I thought were buried forever." Willa pulled her hands from the dishwater, water dripping onto the floor between them, her pulse racing. "I feel it too," she admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "When I am around you, when you look at me like I am someone worth seeing, Marcus, I have not felt this way since before Edgar got sick, maybe not even then. And it terrifies me because everything I thought I could count on turned to dust, and I do not know if I can trust this." Marcus reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and took her wet hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, solid and real. "I cannot promise you that life will not bring more pain," he said. "We have both lost enough to know that is not how the world works. But I can promise you that whatever happens, you will not face it alone anymore. And I can promise you that what I feel for you is real, even if it scares us both." Willa looked down at their joined hands, at the way his fingers curled around hers with such gentleness, and felt something inside her chest unfurl like a flower that had been waiting for sunlight. "I want to believe that," she whispered. "I want to believe that maybe I did not lose everything, that maybe I just had to lose it all to find this." "Then believe it," Marcus said, his other hand coming up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she had not realized had fallen. "Believe in this. Believe in us." And then he was leaning in, giving her every chance to step back. But Willa met him halfway, her eyes fluttering closed as his lips found hers in a kiss that was gentle and careful and full of all the hope and fear and possibility that hung between them. She felt his hand tighten on hers, felt the warmth of his body as he stepped closer, and let herself fall into the moment, into the feeling of being wanted and valued and seen. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing a little harder, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me," he said. "Not as my housekeeper or my employee, but as someone I am courting properly, someone I want to build a future with. Let me show you what it is like to be cherished the way you deserve." Willa's heart was hammering against her ribs, her whole body alive with sensation and emotion. "Yes," she said, the word coming out somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Yes, Marcus, I will stay." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her close while she buried her face in his shoulder and let herself feel safe in a way she had not experienced in so long. They stood there in the kitchen with the dishes half finished and the lamp burning low, two people who had lost everything finding something new in each other's arms. The next few months passed like a dream Willa was afraid to wake from. Winter settled over Wyoming with snow that turned the landscape into something pristine and beautiful, and Marcus courted her with a patience and attentiveness that made her feel like the most precious thing in the world. He brought her wildflowers he found sheltered in protected valleys, took her on rides across the ranch to show her his favorite places, sat with her in the evenings reading aloud from books while she mended or knitted. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, their losses, their hopes for the future. Marcus told her about Sarah, about the joy of their 3 years together and the devastating grief of losing her and their unborn child in one terrible night. Willa told him about Edgar, about the slow dissolution of their marriage as gambling consumed him, about the guilt she carried for feeling more relieved than devastated when he died. They shared their scars with each other, and in doing so began to heal. Tom watched their growing relationship with approval, occasionally making gruff comments about how it was good to see Marcus smile again, how the ranch was thriving with Willa's influence. She had expanded her role beyond just housekeeping, helping with the chickens they kept, tending a winter garden in a protected area near the house, even learning to help with some of the ranch bookkeeping that Marcus had been neglecting. In March of 1884, when the first signs of spring were pushing through the melting snow, Marcus took Willa out to a ridge that overlooked the entire ranch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and the land stretched out before them like a promise. "I built this place with Sarah," Marcus said, his arm around Willa's waist as they stood looking out over the view. "After she died, I thought it would always feel like a memorial to what I lost, but you have helped me see it differently. Now it feels like it could be a foundation for something new." Willa leaned into him, her head on his shoulder, feeling more content than she had known was possible. "It is a beautiful place. You should be proud of what you have built." "I am proud of what we are building," Marcus corrected gently. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his, and Willa's breath caught at the expression on his face. "Willa Dawson, I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you have brought joy back into my life when I thought I would never feel it again. I love the way you hum when you are cooking and the way you scrunch your nose when you are concentrating. I love that you rode a freight train to nowhere and somehow ended up exactly where you were meant to be." Tears were streaming down Willa's face, but she was smiling so wide it almost hurt. "I love you too, Marcus. You saved my life that night by the railroad tracks, and you have been saving it every day since by showing me that I am worth saving." Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, simple gold with a small stone that caught the dying sunlight. "This was my grandmother's. I would be honored if you would wear it as my wife. Marry me, Willa. Let me spend the rest of my life showing you how loved you are." "Yes," Willa said, the word coming out as a joyful shout. "Yes, Marcus, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her with a passion that took her breath away. His hands in her hair, her arms around his neck, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. When they finally broke apart, the sun had fully set and the stars were beginning to emerge overhead, the same stars that had shone down on them that first night when he brought her to the ranch. "When?" Willa asked, still pressed close against him. "When should we marry?" "As soon as you want," Marcus said. "Tomorrow if you are willing, next month if you want time to plan. I do not care about the details, Willa. I just want you to be my wife." She thought about it, about the life she had left behind and the life she was stepping into. "Let's not wait," she said. "Let's get married soon. I have already lost enough time to grief and hardship. I want to start our life together now." They set the date for 3 weeks later, which gave them time to make arrangements but did not drag things out unnecessarily. Willa used some of her wages to buy fabric in town and sewed herself a simple but beautiful dress in cream-colored cotton. Marcus arranged for the local minister to come to the ranch and invited a handful of their neighbors to witness the ceremony. Tom cleaned up remarkably well and stood as Marcus's best man, and Mrs. Miller from the restaurant stood up with Willa. The wedding took place on a warm April morning in 1884, in front of the ranch house with the Bighorn Mountains as a backdrop. Willa had woven wildflowers into her hair, and Marcus wore his best suit and looked at her like she hung the moon and stars. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Marcus kissed her, Willa felt something settle into place inside her chest. Some piece of herself she had not realized was missing until that moment. They had a modest celebration with their guests, and then everyone departed, leaving Marcus and Willa alone as the sun began to set. He carried her over the threshold of their home because it was truly their home now, not just his house where she worked, and set her down gently in the front room. "Mrs. Vaughn," he said, his voice full of wonder and joy. "My wife." "Mr. Vaughn," she replied, her hands on his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and steady beneath her palms. "My husband." He kissed her again, deeper this time, full of promise and desire, and the kind of love that Willa had read about in books but never thought she would experience in real life. Marcus picked her up again and carried her upstairs to the bedroom that was now theirs together, and they sealed their vows in the privacy of the night, learning each other's bodies with tenderness and passion. Two wounded souls finding wholeness in each other's arms. The months that followed were the happiest of Willa's life. She and Marcus fell into an easy partnership, running the ranch together, building a life that was richer for having both of them in it. They worked side by side during the day and fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms at night. They laughed more than Willa had ever laughed in her life, and when the hard days came, because they still did, grief and memory did not simply disappear, they faced them together. In the fall of 1884, Willa realized she was pregnant. She told Marcus one evening after dinner, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach, watching his face transform from confusion to understanding to pure joy. "A baby," he breathed, his eyes shining. "Willa, we are going to have a baby." "Yes," she said, laughing at his expression. In the spring, probably late April or early May, Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe, and she felt him trembling. "I am terrified," he admitted against her hair. "After what happened with Sarah, Willa, I cannot lose you." She pulled back to look at him, cupping his face in her hands. "You will not lose me," she said firmly. "I am strong and healthy, and we will be careful. We will bring the doctor out from town when it is time, and we will face this together, just like we face everything." "Together," Marcus repeated like a vow. "Always together." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Marcus was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying about whether Willa was doing too much, eating enough, resting enough. She found it endearing even when it was a little suffocating, understanding that his fear came from a place of deep love and old wounds. Tom teased them both mercilessly, predicting that Marcus would be completely insufferable by the time the baby actually arrived. He was not wrong. When Willa went into labor on a warm May morning in 1885, Marcus nearly wore a path in the floor with his pacing while the doctor and Mrs. Miller attended to her upstairs. Tom eventually dragged him outside and made him chop wood just to give him something to do with all his nervous energy. But when Willa's cry of pain drifted through the open windows, Marcus dropped the axe and started for the house, only Tom's hand on his shoulder stopping him. "Let the doc do his job," Tom said quietly. "She is strong. She will be fine." Marcus stood there with his hands clenched into fists, every muscle in his body taut with tension, until finally he heard a different sound. A baby's cry, strong and loud, cutting through the afternoon air. He broke away from Tom and ran into the house, taking the stairs 3 at a time, bursting into the bedroom where Mrs. Miller was just wrapping a squirming bundle in a blanket. "You have a son, Marcus," the doctor said, smiling. "And your wife is tired but healthy." Marcus's eyes went immediately to Willa, who was propped up against pillows, her hair damp with sweat but her face radiant. "Come meet your son," she said, her voice exhausted but full of love. He moved to the bed on shaking legs, and Mrs. Miller placed the baby in his arms. Marcus looked down at the tiny face, the small fists waving in the air, and felt his heart crack open in a way it never had before. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Willa, he is absolutely perfect." "Matthew," Willa said softly. "I thought we could call him Matthew, after your father." Marcus looked at her with tears streaming down his face, this woman who had ridden into his life on a freight train with nothing and had given him everything. "Matthew Vaughn," he said, testing out the name. "It is perfect." The doctor and Mrs. Miller left them alone after ensuring both mother and baby were stable, and Marcus carefully climbed onto the bed beside Willa, the three of them together, a family. "You did it," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You were so brave, Willa. I am in awe of you." "We did it," she corrected, leaning into him. "All of this, Marcus, we built this together, this life, this family. I got on that freight train thinking I had nothing left, and instead it brought me to everything I never knew I needed. Best decision I ever made was stopping to check on a woman who looked like she needed help," Marcus said, his eyes still on their son. "I thought I was just offering you a job. Turns out I was finding the other half of my soul." Matthew squirmed and made a small sound, and they both looked at him with the kind of devotion only new parents can understand. Willa reached out to touch his tiny hand, and his fingers curled around hers instinctively. "He is going to grow up surrounded by love," Willa said. "He will never know what it is like to feel unwanted or alone, because we will make sure he always knows how precious he is. Just like I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know how precious you are," Marcus said, kissing her again. "I love you, Willa Vaughn. Thank you for choosing me, for choosing this life, for giving me everything I thought I had lost forever." "I love you too," she whispered. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. You gave me hope when I had none, and a home when I had nowhere to go, and a love I never dreamed I deserved." They sat together as the sun moved across the sky, watching their son sleep, marveling at the miracle of his existence. Outside, Tom was probably celebrating in his own quiet way, and the ranch was continuing on with its daily rhythms. But in that bedroom, time seemed to slow down, allowing them to simply be present in the profound joy of the moment. As Matthew grew from an infant into a toddler, the ranch flourished along with their family. Marcus and Willa worked together to expand their operations, bringing in more cattle and horses, building additional structures, slowly turning the property into one of the most successful ranches in the Buffalo area. They hired additional help as needed, but the core of everything was always the partnership between them, the deep love and respect that allowed them to weather any storm together. Matthew was a happy child, full of curiosity and energy, with his father's dark eyes and his mother's bright smile. He toddled after Marcus during the day, learning about horses and cattle and the land, and cuddled with Willa in the evenings while she read to him or sang lullabies. Their home was always filled with laughter and warmth, a stark contrast to the empty house Marcus had inhabited before Willa arrived. In the spring of 1887, Willa discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was less fear and more excitement, a confidence born of having been through it successfully once before. Marcus was still protective, but not quite as frantically so, and Tom rolled his eyes at both of them when they started debating baby names months before the birth. Their daughter arrived in January of 1888 during a snowstorm that blanketed the ranch in white. She came fast and relatively easy, as if eager to join the family, and Marcus was actually in the room this time, holding Willa's hand through the contractions and watching in awe as their daughter entered the world. They named her Lily, after Willa's mother, and she had Willa's lighter hair and Marcus's stubborn chin. With 2 children now, their lives became even fuller and more chaotic. Matthew was a doting older brother, constantly wanting to help with Lily, bringing her toys and patting her head with a gentleness that made both Willa and Marcus's hearts swell. The house rang with the sounds of children laughing and playing, and more than once, Willa would catch Marcus watching their family with an expression of such pure contentment that it took her breath away. "What are you thinking?" she asked him one evening in the summer of 1889, after they had put the children to bed and were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, his arm around her shoulders. "I am thinking about how different my life is now compared to 5 years ago," Marcus said. "When I found you by those railroad tracks, I thought I was just helping someone in need. I had no idea I was finding my future, my whole reason for being." Willa turned to look at him, her hand coming up to touch his face, feeling the familiar scrape of his evening stubble beneath her palm. "You saved me that night, Marcus, not just from hunger and cold, but from giving up entirely. I was so lost, so broken, and you showed me that I was still worth something, that I could still build a good life." "We saved each other," Marcus said, capturing her hand and bringing it to his lips. "I was alive but not living, going through the motions but not really feeling anything. You reminded me what it meant to have hope, to open my heart again even though it was terrifying." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the horses moving in the barn, an owl calling in the distance, the gentle creak of the porch under their weight. It was the kind of peace that only comes from being exactly where you are supposed to be, with exactly who you are supposed to be with. "You ever think about that night?" Willa asked quietly. "About what would have happened if you had not stopped?" Marcus pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her hair. "All the time," he admitted. "And it terrifies me because I came so close to just riding past, to being too wrapped up in my own thoughts to notice you. But something made me stop, maybe fate or luck or divine intervention. Whatever it was, I will be grateful for it every day for the rest of my life." "I am grateful too," Willa said. "Grateful I had the courage to get on that train even though I had no idea where I was going. Grateful you saw me not as a burden but as someone worth helping. Grateful for every single day we have had since then." As the years passed, their life continued to grow richer and fuller. Matthew grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, learning everything Marcus could teach him about running the operation. Lily was more of a free spirit, equally comfortable riding horses or helping her mother with the garden she had cultivated around the property. They had one more child, another son they named Samuel, born in 1891 when Willa was 31 and Marcus was 35. The ranch became known throughout the region as a place of warmth and hospitality. Marcus and Willa were respected members of the Buffalo community, always willing to help neighbors in need, hosting gatherings and celebrations, supporting the local church and school. Tom eventually retired from active ranch work, but stayed on in the bunkhouse, becoming a beloved grandfather figure to the children. In the evenings, when the work was done and the children were in bed, Marcus and Willa would often find themselves back on that porch, watching the stars come out over the Bighorn Mountains. They would talk about their day, make plans for the future, sometimes just sit in silence with their hands intertwined, drawing comfort from each other's presence. "Remember when you asked me to start over with you that first night?" Willa said one evening in the summer of 1895, when they had been married for 11 years, and she could hardly remember what life had been like before him. "How could I forget?" Marcus said. "Best decision I ever made, asking that question." "Best decision I ever made was saying yes," Willa replied. "I thought starting over meant leaving everything behind and building from nothing. But what I learned was that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what truly matters. I had to ride that freight train away from my old life to find my real life here with you." Marcus turned to her, his eyes reflecting starlight, still looking at her with the same devotion he had shown from the beginning. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Willa Vaughn. Every single day you make me grateful to be alive. And you make me grateful I survived," Willa said, tears shining in her eyes. "You make me grateful I had the strength to keep going even when I wanted to give up. Because it brought me here to this life, to you, to our children, to everything we have built together." He kissed her then, slow and deep, a kiss that held over a decade of love and commitment and partnership. When they broke apart, they stayed close, foreheads touching, breathing in sync. "I love you," Marcus whispered, "forever and always." "I love you too," Willa whispered back. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. Thank you for giving me a reason to start over." "Thank you for being brave enough to take that chance," Marcus replied. "Thank you for trusting me with your heart, even when you had every reason not to trust anyone." They stayed on the porch until the moon rose high overhead. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built a love that would last a lifetime. Inside the house, their children slept safe and warm, the physical manifestation of the life they had created together. The ranch sprawled around them, productive and thriving, a testament to their hard work and partnership. As the years continued to pass, as their children grew and eventually started families of their own, as Marcus's hair turned gray and Willa developed laugh lines around her eyes, their love only deepened. They grew old together, side by side, facing every challenge as a team, celebrating every victory as partners. They became pillars of the Buffalo community. Their story passed down as an example of how sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best things if we are brave enough to keep moving forward. Matthew took over primary management of the ranch as Marcus aged, but the older man never fully retired, always finding some task that needed his attention. Lily married a neighboring rancher's son and stayed close, bringing her own children to visit their grandparents regularly. Samuel became a teacher in Buffalo, but came home every weekend, never wanting to stray too far from the place where he had grown up surrounded by so much love. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1909, Marcus and Willa renewed their vows in front of their children and grandchildren, standing in the same spot where they had first been married. Marcus was 59 now, his face lined with age and weather, but his eyes still shone with the same love when he looked at his wife. Willa was 54, her hair more silver than brown, but still beautiful in Marcus's eyes, still the woman who had changed his entire world. 25 years ago I made you a promise, Marcus said, holding both her hands in his. I promised to cherish you, to stand by you, to love you through whatever life brought our way. And I have kept that promise every single day, Willa. You are still the first thing I think about when I wake up, and the last thing I think about before I sleep. You are still the person I want to share everything with, the person who makes every day worth living. Willa was crying openly, not caring who saw. You have given me a life I never dreamed was possible, she said. When I stumbled off that freight train with nothing, I thought I was at the end of something, but I was really at the beginning of the greatest adventure of my life. You taught me what real love looks like, Marcus. You showed me that I was worthy of being cherished, that my past did not define my future. Every day with you has been a gift. They kissed while their family applauded, and Willa felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt the first time Marcus kissed her all those years ago in the kitchen while doing dishes. Some things never changed, no matter how much time passed. The celebration that followed was full of joy and laughter, with multiple generations of family gathered to honor the couple who had started it all. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Marcus and Willa found themselves once again on their porch, in the spot that had become their sanctuary over the years. 25 years, Willa said, shaking her head in wonder. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday that you found me by those train tracks. Other times it feels like we have been together forever. I hope we have forever more, Marcus said, pulling her close. I want at least another 25 years with you, Mrs. Vaughn, maybe 50 if we are lucky. I will take whatever time we get, Willa said, as long as I get to spend it with you. They did get more years, blessed years full of watching their grandchildren grow, seeing the ranch continue to prosper under Matthew's guidance, traveling occasionally to other parts of Wyoming and Montana, but always returning home to Buffalo, to the land that had witnessed their love story unfold. On quiet evenings, when it was just the two of them, Marcus would sometimes pull Willa onto his lap in the rocking chair on the porch, and they would sit together watching the sun set over the mountains, her head on his shoulder, his arms wrapped securely around her waist. "You have any regrets?" Marcus asked her once, when they were both well into their 60s, their bodies slower but their love as strong as ever. Willa thought about it seriously, about the hard years with Edgar, about the desperate journey on the freight train, about all the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment. "Not a single one," she said finally. "Everything I went through, even the painful parts, led me to you. And that makes it all worth it." "I used to regret not being able to save Sarah," Marcus admitted quietly. "I carried that guilt for so long, wondering what I could have done differently. But loving you taught me that sometimes we cannot control what we lose, only how we move forward from it. Sarah will always be part of my history, but you, Willa, you are my present and my future. You are the love that healed me and made me whole again." Willa turned to kiss him, gentle and tender, the kiss of two people who knew each other completely, who had weathered storms together and come out stronger. "We healed each other," she said. "Two broken people who found a way to make something beautiful out of the pieces." As the twilight deepened and the first stars appeared, they stayed wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for every moment, every day, every year they had been given. The ranch was quiet around them, settling into its evening rhythms, a place of peace and prosperity built on the foundation of their love. In the spring of 1915, when Marcus was 65 and Willa was 60, they celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary with their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren gathered around. The house was full of noise and laughter and life, and as Willa looked around at all the faces, these people who existed, because she had been brave enough to get on that freight train, because Marcus had been kind enough to stop and help a stranger, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. After everyone had left and they were cleaning up together, moving slowly but still preferring to do things themselves when they could, Marcus caught Willa's hand and pulled her into an embrace. "What was that for?" she asked, smiling up at him. "Do I need a reason to hold my wife?" Marcus replied, "Though if you want one, I was just thinking about how lucky I am. 31 years of waking up beside you, of building this life together, of watching our family grow. I am the luckiest man alive, Willa." "I am pretty lucky myself," she said, resting her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. "You gave me everything, Marcus. A home, a family, a love that has sustained me through everything. When I think about that frightened woman who jumped off a freight train with nothing to her name, I almost cannot believe she was me. You transformed my life." "You transformed mine," Marcus countered. "I was empty before you, just going through the motions." You filled me back up with purpose and joy and love. We transformed each other." They finished cleaning in companionable silence, then headed upstairs to their bedroom, the same room where they had spent their wedding night over 3 decades ago. They prepared for bed with the easy familiarity of a long marriage, and when they slid under the covers, Marcus pulled Willa close, her back to his chest, his arm draped over her waist. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "I love you too," she whispered back, lacing her fingers with his. They fell asleep like that, the way they had fallen asleep thousands of times before. Two souls intertwined so completely that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. The years continued their inexorable march forward, bringing changes both big and small. Tom passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1916, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch with a simple marker that read, "Friend and Family." Matthew fully took over the ranch operations, though Marcus still insisted on helping with light tasks, unable to imagine a life that did not involve the land he loved. The children married and had families of their own, the grandchildren grew into adults, and the great-grandchildren multiplied. Through it all, Marcus and Willa remained the constant center, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They moved a little slower, needed a little more rest, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, refined and purified by time and experience into something precious and unbreakable. On a warm summer evening in 1920, when Marcus was 70 and Willa was 65, they sat on their porch watching another spectacular sunset. It had been 36 years since Willa had jumped off that freight train, 36 years since Marcus had found her and offered her a new beginning. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Willa asked, her hand in his, their fingers intertwined in the way they always were. "I asked if you wanted to start over with me," Marcus said, a smile in his voice. "Best thing I ever said to anyone." "Best thing I ever heard," Willa replied. "Those words changed my entire life, Marcus. They gave me hope when I had none, a future when I thought I had lost everything. They gave me you." Marcus raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that were now marked with age spots and arthritis but were still beautiful to him. "And you gave me a reason to keep living instead of just existing. You gave me joy and purpose and a love deeper than anything I ever imagined possible. Every day with you has been a blessing, Willa." "We have had a good life," Willa said, her voice thick with emotion. "We have built something beautiful here, this family, this ranch, this love. When I die, I will die happy, knowing I got to spend my life with you." "No talk of dying," Marcus said, pulling her closer. "We have years left yet, you and I. Years to watch our great-grandchildren grow, years to sit on this porch and watch sunsets, years to love each other." And they did have more years, precious years that they savored like fine wine. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1924, surrounded by what seemed like half of Buffalo, all the people whose lives they had touched over the decades. They continued to sit on their porch in the evenings, continued to hold hands and share kisses and whisper words of love in the quiet moments. When Marcus passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1927 at the age of 77, with Willa beside him holding his hand, his last words were, "I love you." Willa, devastated but grateful for every single moment they had shared, made sure he was buried on the hill next to Tom, with a marker that read, "Beloved husband, father, and friend." She would join him there when her own time came, but not quite yet. Willa lived for another 8 years, staying on the ranch with Matthew and his family, still sharp and active despite her advanced age. She spent her days with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, about the night he found her by the railroad tracks, and changed both their lives forever. She wanted them to know that love was worth fighting for, that starting over was always possible, that sometimes the hardest moments lead to the greatest blessings. On a spring evening in 1935, 75-year-old Willa sat on the porch in her favorite rocking chair, watching the sun set over the Bighorn Mountains one last time. She could feel Marcus's presence beside her, as real and solid as it had ever been, and she smiled. "I am ready," she whispered to the empty air that did not feel empty at all. "I am ready to be with you again, my love." She closed her eyes and let herself drift, and when Matthew found her an hour later, she had passed peacefully with a smile on her face, looking more content than anyone had a right to look. They buried her beside Marcus, their markers side by side, eternally together. The story of Marcus and Willa Vaughn became part of Buffalo's local lore, passed down through generations of their descendants and the community they had served so well. It was a story about second chances and the healing power of love, about how sometimes you have to lose everything to find what truly matters. It was a story about a woman who rode a freight train with nothing left and a cowboy who found her and said, "Start over with me tonight," and how those simple words created a legacy that would last forever. Their ranch continued to thrive under the stewardship of their children and grandchildren, a living testament to what they had built together. The porch where they had spent so many evenings remained a favorite gathering place for family, and sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind blew just right, people swore they could feel the presence of the couple who had loved each other so completely. Two souls united across time and space by a bond that death itself could not break. In the end, theirs was a love story worthy of the Wild West, full of grit and determination, hardship overcome through partnership, and a deep and abiding commitment that lasted through everything life threw at them. Willa had jumped off that freight train thinking she had nothing left to lose, and instead found everything she had never known she needed. Marcus had offered a helping hand to a stranger and found the other half of his soul. Together, they had built not just a ranch but a family, not just a life but a legacy, not just a marriage but a love that would be remembered and celebrated for generations to come. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, they were together still, watching over the land they had loved and the family they had created, forever grateful for that November night in 1883, when their paths crossed and changed both their destinies forever. Forever grateful for freight trains and second chances, and the courage to say yes to starting over. Forever grateful for each other, for the love that had saved them both and given meaning to every moment of their shared existence. Their story proved that sometimes the end of one journey is really just the beginning of another, better one. That love can heal even the deepest wounds. That home is not a place but a person, and family is what you build together through dedication and devotion. That the wildest adventure of all is opening your heart to someone else and trusting them with your fragile, precious hope for the future. Marcus and Willa Vaughn lived and loved and left behind a legacy that would never be forgotten, a testament to the enduring power of compassion, second chances, and the kind of love that only comes once in a lifetime if you are very, very lucky and brave enough to reach out and grab it when it appears.